I'm joined by our panelists. Supriya Dwivedi is a columnist with the Toronto Sun. Elamina Abdelmahmoud is social media editor at BuzzFeed Canada. And Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief of Walrus Magazine. So, Elamina, I'm going to start with you on this one. The details are a little sketchy in the report of exactly what happened this year or in previous years, a lot of it, most of it secondhand. But if it's true that older male students, judges, were setting up this list and encouraging these younger students to participate for points, how problematic is that? Is that rape culture or is that just a wild night?
To me, I look at these details and I see it a perfect example of rape culture. It's a perfect example because these students were going and they didn't really know what they were consenting to. They knew that this event was going to be particularly wild, but the fact that consent was implied in this event indicates that it is rape culture, right? So like we don't have a situation where you can consent to something you don't know beforehand. I think that creates an environment where rape culture really thrives.
What do you think?
Look, rape culture, we know that it's real in some instances, but I'm not sure this is rape culture. This seems like the new Puritanism coming from the left, where you have this highly sexualized environment, highly sexualized event, and because it's taking place in a very, what the allegations describe as a very tawdry atmosphere, it's very unsettling. You've got women and men acting in this extremely unwholesome way, but does it sound like rape? Does it sound like there's no consent involved? You actually had two letter writers writing to the student newspaper saying, look, you know, butt out. We did this of our own volition. There was consent. We found it sexually liberating. We were proud of what we did. And what's ironic is when I was younger, this was coming from the right side of the political spectrum. You had socially conservative Christians who were complaining that campus life had been too sexual. Now it's from the left side of the political spectrum. You have people calling out rape culture whenever people are doing stuff that they happen not to approve of. So it's a new Puritan outlook, but it's coming from the left side of the spectrum.
Where are you on this, Priya?
I got to say, I think I sort of agree with John for once. And I would have to say, whereas I do think there's definitely a gradation here that we're seeing, and the consent thing is absolutely valid. To me, rape culture has always meant any culture wherein the dominant attitudes towards rape either facilitate, excuse, tolerate rapists, while at the same time placing the blame and the onus of rape prevention onto the victims. Because there are no allegations of sexual assault or rape in the situation, and we're not talking about victim blaming here. I think the consent is absolutely an issue. I just don't know if I would call it rape culture, but I realize we're kind of getting into the semantics of really specific definitions.
I mean, I think the part of the problem here is that one of the students said, I mean, like listen, we don't know a lot about this report.
Right.
But in the report, one student said, I tried to say no, but the judges said that they were not okay with that. And so when we have an environment like this, I think they are going in and they're creating an event where consent is implied, and that becomes the problem. Because if you look at it as an event where these students are just trying to do something that's sexually fun for them, totally I can see where you're coming from. But to me, this wasn't that. There are lots of kink parties where people participate in these things, but they do it with an understanding and a full consent that what they're going to participate in. But this wasn't that.
If I could just jump in, because I think we read the same report, and I think, if I remember correctly, it was actually the teammates of one of the women. One of the women said, I'm not okay with this, and the teammates were actually encouraging her to do it.
But I mean, either way, if consent is if you're being blindsided when you get in there,
it's unsettling, but there's no allegation that she couldn't have just walked out. What we're talking about is peer pressure.
But that's what rape culture is, right?
Well,
if
that's what rape culture is, then rape culture is nothing. I mean, if
I'm not sure that's true.
If you're going to dilute the concept of rape culture to mean any instance of peer pressure to exist in a sexualized environment, it's kind of the way accusations of fascism or racism have been completely diluted over the years, because it's just used to describe behavior you don't like, and I think that's what's happening here.
I think what we're talking about is creating an environment where someone goes in and says, I consent to some activities, and then being willing to say, I don't want this, and having everyone support that. That is an environment where, it is sexually healthy. But anything that disagrees with that is
condescending to these women. I mean, the women could walk out at any time. You seem to be suggesting that they have no free will of their own to say, I didn't sign up for this, I'm out. Because there's no allegation saying that the doors were locked.
I'm suggesting that this is a little bit bigger than the event, in the sense that their sexual education was formed in an environment where they don't feel comfortable saying those things.
What do you think, Supriya? Too much pressure, or are women fragile and need protection?
I don't think we're fragile and need protection. To me, the main issue, I agree with Elamine in that there seems to be a level of, or degree of being blindsided, essentially, where you're walking into a situation that you didn't necessarily know you were walking into. But John is absolutely right in that this was an issue of peer pressure. So I believe it falls
And a lot of
somewhere.
alcohol.
And a lot of
There's
alcohol.
a lot of drinking before even the list came out.
Exactly, and that's problematic in and of itself, because if you are inebriated to the point where you cannot be providing consent, then your consent is negated to begin with.
But I think to a certain extent, this is a microcosm of some of the contradictions of campus culture, where you do get, well, these were, I think, fourth-year students, but especially freshmen. They come in every year, they drink a crazy amount because they want to lose their inhibitions, and then people make bad decisions. Sometimes people take advantage of them. In this case, there's allegations that the whole thing was sort of rigged in order to get sexual activity stirred up. But if there is a contradiction between the obsession with getting incredibly drunk and then subjecting it after the fact to political categorization, things like rape culture and stuff like that.
What do you think of the reaction of the university? They've basically said that they're going to pass this investigation over to the Student Association. There's been some pushback on that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's abhorrent that the university wouldn't try and step in here in this situation. And let's be completely honest. If this was a hockey team, a basketball team, or any sort of, if there were jocks involved instead of science nerds, there would be a much bigger issue and a much bigger outcry over
Why?
this.
Because they're part of the.
Well, I think because they represent the school.
Yeah.
Because they're wearing the away uniform and they represent the university, I guess, in a more public.
The franchise of the university.
Exactly,
right.
and wanting to give money to that university from an alumni perspective, and it's just more of a PR battle. But if the university isn't stepping in here to say enough is enough, we're not going to tolerate this. Like, look, even one of the pub owners in the story where some of this activity took place said he no longer wanted to be associated with it because it was too much of a liability for him. So if the pub owner says that, how is the university not stepping in to think this is a liability issue?
And I should note that it appears to be just a PR move, because this is a university that spent a lot of money trying to combat sexual violence on campus, and this is the last thing they wanted. They don't want to spend any time talking about this. So as much as possible, they're going to try to play it off and say look, the students are going to investigate and then get back to us.
Just to be clear, there's no allegation of sexual violence here. I think we should be clear that.
Totally.
Yeah.
The university is combating sexual violence.
Also, just to be clear, I think we all agree that the behavior at issue here is pretty disgusting. But last time I checked, students are free to, consent.
Be disgusting.
I think we have to be careful, again, not to impose. These students are either free to have consenting sex lives or they're not. But I think we all agree they're adults. Everyone involved in the story is an adult.
I'm not sure they were consenting, but yes, absolutely agree. If that was, yeah.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, and a few of you, all of you, were in university more recently than I was, but I've been hearing a lot of similar stories of CEOs and hose parties in university, in high school even. This did not happen when I was in. Where is
that
this?
True?
It is very
totally true. Yeah, I agree with what we had to do things like steal a plastic bib. I remember I grew up, McGill University, as I went on one of these things, was steal a plastic bib from the Barbie barn.
Right.
Steal chopsticks from.
So where is this coming from?
I think it's just that kids today are more disgusting than we were. It's the drinking water. So.
There is an element of truth to that, in the sense that I think we're a bit more exposed to, for example, pornography than a lot of other generations. I say we as a member of this particular generation, and I think maybe that raises the sexual stakes in the terms of what you believe is to be fun.
It normalizes vulgar behavior. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't know, Wendy. I didn't go to these parties. I was a nerd in undergrad at McGill, and I was a nerd in law school. Nobody was inviting me to CEO and hose parties, but they definitely existed in my time. And I think what we're talking about right now is the ubiquity of pornography and just the pornification of everything tends to make kids a little bit more exposed to this hypersexualized culture, and so that gets incorporated into their partying.
Well, the Vets Tour, the party has now been canceled for next year. It's just interesting because we've spent so much time talking about sexual assault allegations this year and on campus, all of these consent classes. But Elamina, you're the freshest grad. It doesn't sound like things are getting better.
No, not particularly. I think there was a while where we were getting better at talking about sexual assault and consent, and I think our language has evolved. But there seems to be an increasing intensity of sexual activity and what the new bar of what's acceptable and what's cool is.
Well, we'll see where this goes. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.